Happy Friday. Thank God it's Friday, July 15th. And of course, I'm in New York City, but I'm out of Harlem today. I'm in Columbus Circle. And this is one of my favorite places. It's the base of Central Park. And I'm standing across the street from the statue that's erected in the center of this wonderful commercial hotspot. You see the statue of Christopher Columbus there. I took a photograph earlier because at the bottom of that base you see a homeless person who's obviously suffering at the base of the beginning of basically everyday life as we know it. So what's the relationship between this homeless person lying at the base of this statue and this great figure of Western American history and folklore? And how can really beginning to think about how we got to who we are and where we are without fully understanding why we are is essential to considering how we can transform the world and make it a more beautiful place. I'm dedicating today's conversation, Toby Talk number 8, how we can transform the world, decolonize your mind, to the tragic loss of lives that happened yesterday in Nice, France. I think the count now is up to 84 or 85 people. And this really hit me close for a couple of reasons. One, I have a dear friend who is right now on vacation and who 48 hours before this event sent me a wonderful photograph from Nice, France, a place I haven't visited yet, the south of France, but a place that's been particularly in my bucket list because my father, who was a U.S. military man and spent his entire career, 20 years, serving the U.S. military, on his deathbed, I asked him where was one place in the world that he would like to see again if he could. And he said it was Nice. It was the south of France, and most particularly, it was Nice. And my father was an avid amateur photographer, so I have memories of his pictures of him traveling around the world taking pictures. And so it made me think about how we have gotten to who we are today. What I want to say is, I'm going to keep it short, is that to create a more beautiful world, we have to fully embrace the cycle of creation and destruction. And we have to do it with a pristine intention to creating something that's more beautiful, that's more inclusive, that's more honest, that's more whole. We have to create an ecology where every life matters, where black lives and white lives and poor lives and rich lives and privileged lives and burdened lives, where all of those things matter. And unless we want to get honest about that, and we want to get honest about the history, and we want to get honest about the symbols that we hold and the narratives that we tell about who we are and where we are, but we don't really talk about why we are. And a lot of people every single day are struggling to make sense of what is happening in this world. They're struggling to make sense of why we're seeing what feels like hatred that's coming out of nowhere. And yet nothing comes out of nowhere. And everything, every action, whether it makes sense to us, whether it feels fair to us, whether it feels just to us, it's totally logical in the minds of the people who hold those beliefs that support the actions that they take or that they don't take. And so it's with that I ask, how can we change the world? Last night I was with a group of leaders, business leaders, multicultural leaders from some of the top tech and financial services organizations. And these are people who are privileged, people who are influencers, people who make decisions that impact all of us. And it was a really interesting evening of conversation, because even with all of the privilege and the resources and the safety and protection that working for these large corporations can provide, the room was very quickly divided by two kinds of mindsets. One, those who felt helpless to make a change, and those who felt hopeful. And while we sat in the room of different races and different backgrounds, not just different corporations and different professions, different genders and different socioeconomic histories, different relationships to our history, to our legacy, but still all here because we are descendants of colonialism. And as a result of that, our colonial framework guides why we are where we are, even though we're blind to it. And so I want us to really step back and think, what is our history? How do we use that to create a future that is one that we're all able to be proud of? Not just a future for America, but a future for our world. Because I'm concerned that if we don't change our mind, if we don't think about the work of decolonizing leadership, decolonizing philanthropy, decolonizing the business sector, decolonizing education, decolonizing the environmental work and resources and decisions, decolonizing our neighborhoods, if we don't do that work, then none of the work that we think we need to do and that we're committing resources to do is gonna matter, because it's not gonna be built on honest soil. What I'm suggesting is that we have to return to our original narrative. We have to return to the truth, which includes a future and present investigation of why, the question why. And we have to trust that all answers that are rooted in not just the history, but the present moment and our future are connected to our ability to make sense of that question why. It's a question that's on the hearts and minds of everyone today. Why do we continue to see the kinds of tragedy, the senseless killing? Why do I have to be worried that each time with each attack it feels like it's closer to somebody I know or love? And we're all going to begin to feel more and more that way, because now the randomness of our reality is beginning to take fold, it's beginning to unfold. So now, as I move through the city of New York, a city that I love, a city where I feel relatively safe, now I have to not just look at who you are and think to myself, oh, you could be that person. But I have to ask myself, why am I looking at you in a certain way? What is it that I believe that I hold or that I'm entitled to that you are not? Just because your narrative and how you present as an American is different than my narrative about how I present as an American. I don't want to sound preachy today, but I'm really afraid, and I said that in my very first video a little over a week ago, that if we don't think about the implication of colonization, if we don't think about what it means to recognize that we are all infected by the virus of colonialism, and we have seemed to have moved that off of the discussion agenda for change and transformation. And yet, it's core and central to how I see myself as an American, how I see myself as a global citizen. And it's core and central to how we see those who are all subjects of colonialism. And it doesn't matter whether you are a descendant of the colonists or the colonized. We're all a part of it. None of us are allies in the conversation around a colonialism. We're all subjects. We don't have to be victims, but we're definitely all targets of colonialism. So let's think about what it means to decolonize leadership in the workplace, in our communities, in our churches, even in our own family structures. Let's think about those values and those beliefs, those frameworks that we hold that are born and rooted in colonialism, that are born and rooted in patriarchy, that are born and rooted in racism and sexism and ageism and anti-Semitism and all of the other kinds of antis and exits and minimalizations and marginalizations that speak to the why we are experiencing in this world, in Nice, in France, in Louisiana, the why we are experiencing those things. This is not to place blame. This is to point us all in a steadfast focus on something that only we can do together. So hashtag decolonize leadership. Let's begin that conversation. Have it with the people who you're talking to. What does it mean? Who would you be if the environment that you lived in was post-colonialist? Not just beyond it, but devoid of it, as if it never existed. What do we have to deconstruct to be able to think about in America? And let's start with the First Nation conversations that still haven't happened. What would it mean to move to that parallel possibility of a decolonized America, where we could all be here contributing and a part of a global fabric that would make us as great as the narrative that we hold up? So it's Friday. I've been thinking about this all day. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to say this or not, but now I don't have to think about it anymore because it's been said. I love you all. This is all I can do. Media, I hope you're listening, because the colonization of our minds is put in place and reinforced by the media. And so be very careful what you digest, because once it's in you, it's very hard to get it out. Love you. Have a great weekend. We'll talk tomorrow.